Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. I wanted to entitle this video How to Rock Out the 1960s. You know, how to close out a decade of CIA and bank sponsored psychological warfare against the people of the United States. And these psyops that I focused on were high concentration in the city of San Francisco, the county of Mendocino, the city of Ukiah, Greenfield Ranch, Marin County. Can't get out of this story without a mention. San Anselmo and Mill Valley hosting electronic shock treatments with none other than Louis Jolyon West and Timothy Leary, who's implicated with Harvard University psilocybin, the Millbrook Institute at the Alfred Hitchcock 64-room mansion, and then University of California, Berkeley, where Timothy Leary received a doctorate in psychology. And not going to forget about Richard Albert, who was a professor at Stanford University. That's right, I said Stanford University. That's where Paul Pelosi's older brother Ron graduated, Stanford University. That's where George Shultz, who was a Princeton alumni and then president of the Bechtel Construction Company, and then later the Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, he was a member of the Hoover Institute, which meets on the Stanford University campus, and he had provisional housing on the Stanford campus where he died. George Shultz died on the Stanford University campus in close proximity to Sand Hill Road, which was where Aaron Valente's last appointment with a private banker, venture capital, private equity, Harvard alum with a MBA from Stanford University, in one of those clandestine service offices along Sand Hill Road. That's where George Shultz said goodbye to the world, and that's where Aaron Valente's last appointment was, with an easy-to-figure-out person who she had the appointment with from 1:30 p.m. until 3 p.m. Then she was supposed to catch a flight home to Salt Lake City, Utah, around 6:30 p.m., but she never made that flight, and she ended up dead as a doornail 5 days later on a Saturday morning in the back of her rent-a-car, which is loaded with GPS tracking transponders and a cell phone that should be working. And her last words to her mother on Monday night, October 7th, 2019, were, "It's all a game. It's a thought experiment. We're in the Matrix." That's words to live by. Aaron Valente died by those words. And her last place that she was seen alive was on Sand Hill Road in close proximity to Stanford University. Anyway, I wanted to tell you that originally I was thinking the way you rock out the 60s was you rock it out with Abigail Folger's mother, Eunice Mejia, who I think was the single most influential person of San Francisco during the 1960s and perhaps the latter part of the 1950s. However, she got zero press regarding her role in the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic and the Haight-Ashbury CIA operations going on in San Francisco. At the time, Eunice Mejia lived on Broadway. That's right, I said Broadway Pacific Heights, Broadway. That's where the infamous hammer that we can't find, Paul Pelosi hammer attack, that was on 2640 Broadway. That's what I said. That's 4 blocks away from 2222 Broadway, which is the Convent of the Sacred Heart Order indoctrination center for rich children who can afford to go there and pay 60 grand a year to have their children indoctrinated into obedience, world mission, and oath of secrecy. All right, and I was going to mention Timothy Leary, who I think is the second most influential person in San Francisco during the 1960s, at least from 1965 until 1969. Timothy Leary, LSD maven, CIA soldier, attended West Point Academy in New York on the Hudson River, and didn't graduate, but he did attend. And he went into the United States Army for World War II. And then the third person in San Francisco who actually had a lot of influence was Colonel Paul Tate, Sharon Tate's father, is the number 3 guy. Louis Jolyon West, who is the only medical doctor anywhere to be found in close proximity to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. You have a CIA medical doctor psychiatrist, Louis Jolyon West, who's doing God knows what with Timothy Leary, with unsuspecting people, Operation Midnight Climax, Operation Anti-War Vietnam, Operation Psilocybin, Operation whatever you were doing at Harvard, let's do it out here in San Francisco. Whatever you're doing at the Alfred Hitchcock 64-room estate in Millbrook, New York, along the Hudson Valley, whatever we were doing there, let's repeat it out here in San Francisco on the West Coast. Hey, whatever works in New York City would go very well in Chicago, Miami, and of course, San Francisco. And if I've learned anything from studying the clandestine services, they're not very imaginative. They rinse and repeat continuously. All right? Then I was going to say George Moscone had a role, but I don't know exactly what his role was in 1969 when Abigail Folger got bayoneted 28 times to death with the M7 bayonet. Standard NATO issue, standard United States Army issue. The weapon used at the My Lai massacre on March 16, 1968, Charlie Company with M16 rifles and the M16 with the M7 bayonet attachment were taken into the village on a Saturday morning at 7:30 a.m. to murder 504 innocent women and children and pregnant women for a psychological operation that is now known as Operation Phoenix. Shouldn't be too surprised because Operation Gladio in Europe preceded Operation Phoenix and looks a lot like it. They used bombs and they used bullets and they used car crashes and fake suicides as part of Operation Gladio, as they did with Operation Phoenix. They also invoked torture and had interrogation centers in 47 provinces of what they call Vietnam, what I call French Indonesia. And they tortured people there, and they had a quota-driven system, which IBM helped them with a card system to keep track of the number of people that were arrested, detained, tortured, and murdered. And according to William Colby, it was 26,000 innocent people were tortured and murdered for Operation Phoenix over, approximately a 6 to 7 year period from 1968 until 1975, when the United States left town. But not before we sold a lot of Dow Chemical napalm and Agent Orange from Monsanto Corporation. Not before we sold 10,000 Bell helicopters. Not before we got General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin involved with hardware sales and surveillance opportunities. Not before we got the Navy Office of Navy Intelligence involved with doing all manner of pointing out targets so we could bomb them for no reason whatsoever, because I'm not sure the Office of Navy Intelligence is the best intel agency of the world, but they certainly know how to boost sales for contractors. Now, if people on this happy post-election day, I wanted to emphasize that you need to watch out for people like Ron DeSantis. My God. You do know he works for CIA, right? He says everything I like to hear. It's music to my ears, except that he's a Trojan horse. You know Ron DeSantis went to Yale University, right? Undergraduate. And then you know that Ron DeSantis attended Harvard Law School, right? And you know that he then went on to Office of Navy Intelligence in Coronado Island in San Diego. The site of the first Father Junipero mission is San Diego, and that's where Ron DeSantis went after he went to Yale, and after he went to Harvard, he goes on to ONI. And then, before he gets the Navy SEAL training, they sent him to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for prisoner dilemma game training, which is what prisoner incarceration is all about. It's about the prisoner dilemma game. That's what COVID is, people. COVID is prisoner dilemma game. Do you trust your neighbor? I don't. I don't trust my neighbors. That's prisoner dilemma game. You don't know who's getting rewarded for espionage, right? Because your neighbor spies on you. That's what Amazon Ring camera is, right? That's what the mesh is, right? That's what listening devices are for, right? That's what the little bugs in your cell are about, right? That's why I was told by, I've been told by inmates and I've been told by criminal defense lawyers, don't ever discuss your case when you're in the county jail. Don't do it. Because guess what? The district attorney is going to listen to all your conversations if you say something that's provocative, something that they maybe would make a deal with you for, something that could implicate someone else, or some way to make yourself incriminated even more than you already are. If you talk about your involvement or participation in a event that could be construed as criminal, then guess what? You're recorded. Your conversation is surveilled and made a record of. All right? So that's the prisoner dilemma game when you're in the county jail or state prison or federal prison. All the prisoners have that dilemma. But guess what? Just because you're not in jail, just because you're not incarcerated, doesn't mean you're not subjected to the same thing. Your television is spying on you. Your cell phone is spying on you. This broadcast is being monitored and controlled. And we already have established that Google and YouTube follows the directives of the WHO, the World Health Organization. COVID-19 protocols come out of Switzerland. That come out of Geneva, Switzerland, Lake Le Monde, right? Which means the world. Lake Le Monde in France, that means the world. That means one world order, okay? Geneva, Switzerland, home to the Red Cross. Are you kidding? Home to the European United Nations office. And then Manhattan has supposedly got an office for United Nations that nobody ever cares about. And you got all the United States private schools, all the public schools, all the courts, all the county supervisors, all the city mayor's offices follow directives from Geneva, Switzerland, and the World Health Organization. So you can forget anything that if you're delusional enough to vote and think it matters, I just want to tell you, like, George Carlin is someone you should embrace, okay? Your choices are Coke or Pepsi, aisle or window, smoking or non-smoking. All the big important decisions like health policies and surveillance and 5G towers and who policies are not decided by democracy. It's decided by a group of secret people, secret societies. So I think it's time that I re-quote John Kennedy, who gave his life for us, and just tell you, I'm not going to go the whole speech. Please do listen to it, and I'll post it below. I will post it below. But here's an excerpt of what John Kennedy told the press club at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel on April 27th, 1961, to just excerpt out of his speech. President of the United States to the press club, which is a CIA-controlled fourth branch of government. Remember, we had the legislative branch of government, which is a combination of the nobility class in the Senate and the commoners in the House of Representatives. I think there's 438 Congress people and 100 senators, which includes an 89-year-old Diane Feinstein, if you really want to count an 89-year-old woman. I don't. And I don't want to count an 82-year-old Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. I don't want to count her. But anyway, since it doesn't matter if these people are intelligent or paying attention or taking a nap, because the Congress of the United States doesn't run anything. It's a legislative branch of government. And the executive branch is supposed to make the operation decisions. But they're asleep at the wheel, too, because you got a senile dementia president called Sleepy Joe, with Kamala Harris, who's a graduate of the Hastings Law School, which is right across the street from where George Moscone had his head blown off by, allegedly, Dan White, who's 6 years in the United States Army and has some psychological issues, which is why they hired him. And he's smart. And they're not running the show. You can't have senile dementia and run the show. That's the executive branch. So you have legislative branch, which is the Congress and the Senate. you have the executive branch, and then you have the so-called Supreme Court judiciary, which they're a politically gerrymandered, rigged, fake system of old men and women. And who cares what they think? I mean, do you really want the United States central authority to tell you what's legal and illegal? I don't. And that's the three branches of government, except that the so-called free press was the fourth. And they're the ones that are supposed to be the watchdogs on the other. And guess what? They're completely and utterly compromised. So when John Kennedy delivered this speech on April 27th, 1961, he knew that. He knows he's speaking directly to the CIA. And he says out loud, "For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration by day instead of invasion by night, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day." That's what he said. And let me paraphrase what John Kennedy was doing. And he's a graduate of the same school that Ron DeSantis is, which is ONI, Office of Navy Intelligence. And Jack Kennedy had that background. And he got a PT 109 assignment on the strength of that, along with his father, Joe. He's saying, "Come and get me. Come and get me." Now, I'm not going to put Ron DeSantis in the same category as Jack Kennedy unless somebody blows Ron DeSantis' head off. If he gets killed and murdered and assassinated, I will. But if he doesn't, I won't. Because I think he's more of a Trojan horse than he is of a national hero. Because he's creating Florida, which is a warmer in the wintertime than it is in New York City, but he's creating a honeypot operation in the same way that San Francisco created the Haight-Ashbury free concerts with Bill Graham, whose real name is Wolf Krajanka. He's a Jewish fellow from New York City who came out here to California to work for free, but somehow he managed to get an $18 million palace built in Marin County above Tiburon in Corte Madera, a spectacular property that's higher than anywhere along the Tiburon or Belvedere area. He looks down on Belvedere. He looks down on Tiburon from his palace, 360 degree, well, not quite 360, but let's say 300 degree panoramic views. Wolf Krajanka got that home until he was murdered at age 61, assassinated in a fake helicopter crash. Well, it was a real helicopter explosion, but it was a fake crash. So, what can I tell you? That JFK didn't already. So then we get back to San Francisco, and who else was influential in San Francisco in 1969? Jim Jones of the People's Temple, along with Bill Graham, free concerts, along with Diane Feinstein, who's getting ready to get ready, along with Roman Polanski, who's the same age as Diane Feinstein, along with Charlie Manson, who actually had a minor to zero role in San Francisco. And he had a greater role in Hollywood and Pacific Palisades and Canoga Park, but not yet. Not really until December 12th, 1969, when Charlie Manson was wrongfully indicted for murder of Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger, did Charlie Manson appear and get injected into the psychops. Before that, he was absolutely a nobody. Jimmy Jones had more press than, Charlie Manson had no press before December 12th, 1969. Then he's had 52 years of press. Jim Jones had quite a bit of press since 1965 until his murder in 1978 in French Guiana. See, so that's why Charlie Manson is more infamous or famous than Jim Jones, because he's had 52 years of mendacity, the fourth branch of government lying about Charlie Manson, who didn't harm a fly. And Jim Jones got less press conference, and he's associated with 906 people being murdered at a concentration camp in French Guiana. But he's not as hated. He's not as odious as Charlie Manson. That's how screwed up this story is. And let's not leave out Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi, who returned to San Francisco in 1969. Before we say goodbye to the 60s, we got the Pelosi family right there where the Zodiac's final killing occurs. in their neighborhood in Presidio Heights. And there is Sharon Tate's father. He's living there too. So that's what I wanted to do, but I ended up drilling a little bit more into the Zodiac killers, killings during this quick story because the 60s were a psychops of a lot of killings. I'm just mentioning a few. Marilyn Monroe in 1962, John Frankenheimer, who's the director for the Manchurian Candidate, which is basically what we have here today, Switty, we have that with COVID, because everybody who wants to force mandates on you is forcing a Manchurian Candidate assassination upon you. They're foisting policies that should be your free choice. That's kind of what a Manchurian Candidate does. If they assassinate you by whatever means, they are mind controlled to do so. And we have that with COVID. There are many mind controlled people that are very evident out there that they're not exercising critical thinking and free choice. And Jack Kennedy told us, intimidation instead of free choice. That's what John Kennedy said on April 27th, 1961. He said that we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy. Yeah, out of Geneva, Switzerland, Lake Lemond, the world, New World Order, Agenda 21. Jack Kennedy told you this in 1961. Intimidation instead of free choice. That's COVID. That's mandates. On guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. That's 5G towers spying on you 24/7. On infiltration instead of invasion. That's our school system. That's our university systems. Right? That's our private schools. That's our public schools. They're all infiltrated. They all follow the policies of the WHO, which I've already established is in Geneva, Switzerland. Home for the Red Cross. The Red Cross paid the rent for Lee Harvey Oswald when he lived in Minsk, Russia. That's who paid Lee Harvey Oswald got free rent when he lived in Russia, in Minsk, by the American Red Cross. That's right. So American Red Cross is an infiltrated vassal of the CIA. All right, then what else was going on in 1960s in San Francisco? Well, I'll tell you, Paul Avery was a writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, and alongside him was Robert Graysmith, who was the cartoonist. And eventually they were replaced by people like Gwen Knapp, Lance Williams, Mark Fainrow Wada, who I've spoken with Lance Williams personally, and I've had personal meetings with Gwen Knapp. And I understand, I think I understand part of the problem is, of course, if you're going to work at the San Francisco Chronicle or Examiner, which Paul Avery worked at both in his career, there is no way you're going to ever be able to tell the truth, okay? You can tell snippets of the truth, but you're operating within a controlled environment when you work for a CIA-controlled newspaper. So I don't care if you're talking about steroids in baseball, where you're going to tell an incomplete story, and you learn that there's a steroid program involving high schools and Catholic high schools, and then you don't report it, right? Because there's several ways to promote sophistry in the media. One is by never having a story published that's sensitive. So that's the concealment of the truth. That's the concealment, which of course goes against the idea that a free press is the fourth arm of government. Because if there is concealment within the press, which I think Jack Kennedy knew that, you have sophistry. And then another way is liar, liar, pants on fire, applied linguistics. That's where you tell a falsehood, which I think if you saw the 52 years that Charlie Manson was responsible for the Sharon Tate murder, that's liar, liar, pants on fire. No, he wasn't. He had zero involvement. Nada. No involvement at all. So that's 52 years of bald-faced lying. So I would call that a mendacity of the highest order. And that's your press. That's your free press, which I think we know is not free. And it was unfree when William Randolph Hearst at age 23 took over the San Francisco Examiner, you know, way back before the turn of the century. And then he went on to create yellow journalism or promote it. I mean, it already existed. He didn't create it. And remember the Maine, the USS Maine sunk in the Havana Harbor, the town where Jose Menendez was later born. You provide the pictures and I will provide the war, the Spanish-American War. Well, that's the San Francisco Examiner promoting poppycock, promoting war propaganda, ginning up a war. Well, that's what the Chronicle and Examiners were known for during the Vietnam War. They didn't tell the truth at any time. So if you're going to go to Harvard University or one of these fancy schools, which some of those people I mentioned did, and you're going to eventually work for the New York Times, which somebody that I mentioned before did, you're compromised completely, and you're not going to tell the truth. Or if you take a job at ESPN Disney Corporation after you did your steroid and baseball talk, you're owned completely, because you're not going to do no steroid and baseball discussions at ESPN, because that goes against their product, right? Their product is based on steroids and fixing playoff games so that the right teams advance. Yeah, you can fix a game without steroids. I'm just saying steroids is a basic tool because these knuckleheads have to play, a long season and be aggressive. So it's like, how many lawyers do you know don't have a laptop computer? How many accountants do you know don't have a laptop computer? The answer is none. Laptop computers are performance enhancing tools to do your job. That's what steroids are. So blood doping is. So of course you're going to use them, or else you're not going to have a job. That means 100%. There will be no exceptions. There's not an accountant with a number 2 pencil that's going to compete against a spreadsheet and, an Excel spreadsheet with a laptop. I mean, that's Alice in Wonderland, wackadoodle, cuckoo for Cocoa Pops. All right, so Paul Avery floated a theory that Cecilia Shepard, who was one of the Zodiac victims that appears to have been bayoneted 12 times at the Lake Berryessa site on September 27th, 1969, that she knew Sherry Jo Bates. Now, this is unsubstantiated, and I already know that Paul Avery and Robert Greystone are compromised based on the books that they've written. Robert Graysmith wrote a book on Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. That's a CIA operative, Ted Kaczynski. And nowhere did Robert Graysmith implicate Timothy Leary as a CIA career agent who worked on the brain of Ted Kaczynski. He didn't pursue that, and he didn't pursue the Haight-Ashbury felonious activities that were going on when he was a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle, because Ted Kaczynski is associated with the University of California, Berkeley. He's associated with Harvard University as an alumni graduate. He's associated with Timothy Leary, who is associated with Enos Mejia, Abigail Folger's mother. He is associated with Louis Jolion West, who became department head of psychology at UCLA. Now, Cecilia Shepard, let me just hit the pause button real briefly and let you know that officially the Zodiac killings killed 5 people. That's to keep it nice and tidy. It wounded 2 others, so you had 7 victims. Now, I realize that we can go back to Sherry Jo Bates, who was murdered in 1966, and we could add her to the list, and we can go into the future, into the 70s, and we can add more suspicious deaths. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick with my knitting, which is local Zodiac murder. So officially, the killings kicked off in December. And to be real specific, we're talking about December 20th. Is that right? I'm going to say December 20th, 1968. All right. And the first 2 victims, which had no relation to the Zodiac killer whatsoever, but David Faraday, age 17, driving his parents' Rambler station wagon, was shot once with a Super X 22 long pistol bullet in the head and bled out on the ground outside the car. Kind of looks like he was in the passenger seat, so that's a question mark. Betty Lou Jensen, age 16, in a purple dress, she bolts and runs toward Lake Herman. This is on Lake Herman Road. I'm going to go out there and shoot a video of this later this winter, so don't worry, I'll show you what I'm talking about. But anyway, Lake Herman Road, she's about a mile from Lake Herman, maybe 3/4 of a mile. Anyway, she's running in the direction of Lake Herman, which is east, on Lake Herman Road, and she's shot in the back like 6 times, and she bleeds out face first on the dirt gravel turnout, not on the asphalt, next to the asphalt of Lake Herman Road. And it's a little sloppy in terms of the police work. This is done in the county of Solano County, outside the city limit of Vallejo and outside the city limit of Benicia, which is a refining town. Vallejo is a Navy, Mare Island repair facilities for submarines and ships. It was the Kaiser Yard, Henry Kaiser. All right. And there were 10 Super X 22 caliber cartridges discovered at the crime scene. That's very unprofessional. That is unprofessional. There were 22 caliber bullets pulled out of 7 victims at the Sharon Tate murder scene. There were 0 cartridges found. That's very professional. No murder weapons were left. There was a buck knife found, but it wasn't a murder weapon. And then later they injected the Ronald Reagan pistol about a month later, found, 2 miles away over in Sherman Oaks. And again, that weapon was definitely not used in the murder. They did admit the 2 weapons, the buck knife and the Ronald Reagan pistol, were admitted at the Charlie Manson murder case, despite the fact that they were not used in the murders. But they got their play on the media, so it's to psych everybody out into, oh wow, look, we found the weapons. Not. So David Faraday died and Betty Lou Jensen died, age 16 and 17, both dead. So that's professional, but they left 10 cartridges. They found 9 bullets. They sent 8 bullets to the lab. Now that's weird. Why don't you send 9 out of 9, right? But they did, so I don't know. I don't know what the truth is. So they sent 8 bullets to the lab, and yeah, it was a 22. I think we already knew that at the crime scene. It was a 22 caliber bullet. They like to tell you what we already know. Anyway, that was December 20th, 1968. Then nothing happens for 7 months. Nothing happens. There's no Zodiac. There's no Zodiac telephone call. There's no Zodiac letters to the Chronicle or to the Examiner, which are CI newspapers. From the Chronicle is owned by the DeYoung family, and the Examiner afternoon paper is owned by the Hearst Corporation, William Randolph Hearst. They're both controlled by clandestine services, so they're the same. And they don't forget that in 1965, the Chronicle and the Examiner in San Francisco entered into a JOA, Joint Operating Agreement, that they would not step on each other's toes, and basically publish the same copy and pasted stories that are approved by, the adult supervision above, the Paul Averys of the world, because there's someone above Lance Williams, there's someone above Gwen Knapp. Believe me, there are layers of control and command as to what gets published in the newspaper and what is concealed. Because I do believe that, here's another, just an aside, that the people who report on steroids in sports have no experience in sports. They have very little experience in sports. And the people who report on Wall Street and financial matters that you see on television, they have very little experience in finance. And none of these people have any experience in auditing or accounting or money laundering or how to structure ways to conceal transactions. They have no experience, and that's by design. They go to these fancy schools. They go to really expensive, fancy schools, and they get important jobs. But they're not qualified to write on the subjects that they write about. They're not qualified. because they know so little. They know so little. So that's another way you can control these people, is that you just indoctrinate them with mythology, and then they just repeat it and regurgitate it, and then that can be published in the newspaper. But you see, a person like myself, zip it. They are not going to publish my experience from personal interactions. Okay, so I'm not making this up. If you get taught something by a professor at a university, if you don't go out and double and triple and quadruple check it, you should reject it. Reject it. You have to double and quadruple check the poppycock, because you'll find out 90% of what you're told is untrue. All right, so David Farady's dead. Betty Jo Jensen is dead. Then we come out to July 4th, the 4th of July, right? America's birthday. And right on the edge of the city of Vallejo, and in 1 mile from where Betty Jo Jensen and David Faraday were murdered, walking distance. I mean, it's a hilly walk. It's rolling, but it's 1 mile exactly. In Blue Rock Springs, Darlene Ferrin, age 22, who's a mommy of a little child, she's shot like 6 times with a 9mm pistol. She's with Michael Mageau, who's 19 years old, and somehow he winds up in the back seat of this little Corvair that Darlene Ferrin was driving. It's her car. And Michael Mageau, the boy, does not die. He's wounded. Darlene Ferrin, she dies. And some of the cartridges are found on the floor of the passenger seat and on the parking lot asphalt next to the car. That's not professional. But there were at least 9 bullets discharged, and they didn't find 9 cartridges. I think they found 3. So guess what? They're Super X. Now they're 9mm. They're Super X 9mm, whereas the David Faraday bullet was a Super X 22 long. So they're not the same kind, but they're the same manufacturer, Super X. All right, so then a telephone call is made across the street from the Solano County Courthouse in the city of Vallejo, which is about 4 miles from where this murder just happened. And it happens, the phone call comes in, about an hour after the killings. So whoever did the killing made the phone call, kind of a waving to law enforcement, waving to the criminal justice system. Because, of all the places to make a phone call from a payphone, you make it directly across the street from where the killer would be put on trial. That's where the killer would initially be arraigned. If he was arrested and arraigned in the county of Solano, he'd be taken to that courthouse. So the telephone call comes from across the street. And I mean right across the street from the courthouse. It also happens to be 1 block away from where Darlene Ferrin lived, because she lived on the same block that the courthouse was on in the city of Vallejo. Anyway, that's disturbing. More disturbing is if you drill into Darlene Ferrin, you realize that she was the babysitter for Betty Jo Jensen a few years ago. So what I'm saying is the first 2 female victims of the Zodiac killer, which we didn't know who the Zodiac was when they were killed. There was no mention of the word Zodiac. When the telephone call came in, the caller didn't say, "I'm the Zodiac killer." He didn't say that. He just reported 2 people shot at Blue Rock Springs. Right? And then he said, "And I'm responsible for the other kids out on Lake Herman Road." But he didn't say, "I'm the Zodiac." That's done by, I think, a different team that conducts media communications, where you have letters coming in saying, "I'm the Zodiac," and cipher codes. I don't think the killers were involved with cipher codes or writing letters or communicating in any way. Killers kill, and that's what they do. And then poppycock writers type letters or handwrite letters, use their left hand instead of their right hand, don't lick the stamp, use a sponge, all of that stuff that the shooters aren't going to know how to do that. But anyway, now you have 4 victims, 3 died, and the 2 girls know each other. Betty Lou Jensen was babysat by Darlene Ferrin. So that's a coincidence, right? Then some letters come into the San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner regarding the Darlene Ferrin murder. And that's when we inject Zodiac into 1969. It was after July 5th. I don't know, the letters came in like July 7th or 8th. So now you got the Zodiac in there. Even though Hollywood told you, what did they tell you with Charlie Chan in Treasure Island? Back on September 8th, 1939, 30 years before this, they said that there's a Zodiac killer loose in San Francisco murdering people in the wealthy neighborhoods, which would be Seacliff, Pacific Heights, or Presidio Heights, where the Nancy and Paul Pelosi's live, and where Paul Tate, Sharon Tate's father, lives next door to. And it turns out that there's a Zodiac killing there, which I'll get to. Anyway, on September 29th, 1969, at Lake Berryessa, we had Cecilia Ann Shepard, age 22, and Brian Hartwell, age 20, who both attend Pacific Union College in Angwin, which is very close proximity to where Nancy and Paul Pelosi, live at number 2 Zinfandel Lane off of Silverado Trail in St. Helena. Angwin is next door to St. Helena. It's up on the mountain. It's up on a pretty steep mountain, up Howell Mountain. There's a Howell Mountain Road. There's a Sanitarium Ridge Road, too. You should know that Paul and Nancy Pelosi's St. Helena home is in close proximity to a mental institution. Anyway, it's a beautiful neighborhood, all right? If I was going to be at a mental institution, that's the place to be. All right, so if you drill into Cecilia Ann Shepard, it's very disturbing because she was born in India, for God's sakes. She was born in India. Oh my God. How did that happen? Her father's name is Robert Shepard, so I don't know what the heck was going on there that she would be born in India. I wanted to see if it was in close proximity to the Maharishi, but it wasn't, because that's closer to Pakistan and the CIA Air Force Base there, and not too far from Afghanistan, Kabul. The Maharishi is a lot closer to that than where Cecilia Ann Shepard was born, fairly far away, like a couple thousand miles away, like at least 2,000 miles to the east. So she was not in the same zip code or time zone. But so she was born, I know I wrote it down here, I just can never find it. She was 22 years old when she died. So, she's born in like 1947. Yeah, she was born in 1947. And Sherry Jo Bates was born February 4th, 1948. And Paul Avery suggested that Sherry Jo Bates, who went to Riverside City College, the community college in Riverside County, in Riverside City, knew and went to dinner at an Italian restaurant with Cecilia Shepard, who somehow attended high school in San Gabriel. That's where Susan Atkins was born, people, in San Gabriel. It's about 5 miles from Pasadena. It's about 6 miles from downtown Los Angeles, below the San Gabriel Mountains. And Leslie Van Houten was raised in Altadena, which is like 3 miles away from where Susan Atkins was born. Susan Atkins had alcoholic parents and was raised really in San Jose, very close to where Aaron Valente's body was found. Susan Atkins grew up in the neighborhood where they found the body for Aaron Valente, age 33, in the back of her rent-a-car. Anyway, but I am telling you that Susan Atkins was born in San Gabriel, and that's where Cecilia Ann Shepard went to high school. And didn't go to any high school. She went to San Gabriel Academy, which is a private academy, and she was raised Seventh-day Adventist, which is unusual. And then she went to Riverside the city of Riverside to La Sierra University, 1966 to 1967. And that was when Sherry Jo Bates was attending Riverside City College at age 18. Now, she's only age 18, and Cecilia Shepard would be age 19. So it's possible they could have known each other. There's an 11-mile distance between La Sierra University. La Sierra University is 11 miles distance from Riverside City College, which is where Sherry Jo Bates was shot and stabbed to death on a Sunday night when she couldn't start her Volkswagen Beetle, which had been tampered with. Someone pulled the wire off the battery. All right, and that was in 1966, on October 30th, 1966. Sherry Jo Bates was murdered as she left the library at the Riverside City College. And to make it further complicated, my suspects for the Zodiac killings, that there's more than one person involved, would be Don Chaney, who's the United States Air Force, and he lived in Concord, California, in Contra Costa County, right across a bridge from Benicia, which is very close to where the Lake Herman is, and that Arthur Lee Allen would have been his partner, be two of them. And I believe there would be at least a third person as a lookout, and with a radio. You know, it's Jedburgh teams, Jedburgh training, it's Operation Gladio, it's Operation, British intelligence. They always go in teams of 3. And in the case of the Sharon Tate murder, I believe you have 4 teams of 3. That's 12. And you have plenty of houses. You got 6 to 8 houses that they can get ready to do the killings and clean up and take showers afterward within 30 to 40 seconds of the Sharon Tate, Abigail Furter murder scene. So actually, you don't even have to be that professional, except killing is a professional business. So you do need to be amped up and ready to kill, because it's going to be messy and it's going to be ugly and it's going to be cruel. So that's who does these killings. That's who's doing these killings. Someone that can kill. Killers kill. So what I was going to say about Don Chaney, who's like 6'4", 6'5", wears a size 12 shoe. They found a size 12 Wingwalker shoe print at Lake Berryessa, the site of the Cecilia Shepard murder. They found an Air Force boot. You should know that where these killings are is in close proximity to Air Force bases. So Cecilia Shepard was killed in very close proximity to Travis Air Force Base, and Sherry Jo Bates was murdered in Riverside at Riverside City College. That's very close. 6 miles away is March Air Force Base. Okay, so Cecilia Shepard, it's confusing because she went to a private high school called San Gabriel Academy. Then she goes to a private university to study music, La Sierra University. But she transfers to Pacific Union College in 1967, and she's going there, and she's 22. So she's in her 5th year of university now. Normally you graduate. She's 22, so she's a year over. She must have lost some credits. And Pacific Union College, if you look at the distinguished alumni from that school, it's very disturbing. And just to showcase one person in particular that bothers me, because we're talking about mind control, right? In all these cases, talking about mind control. And this is just blows my mind. So the list of people is impressive. You should look up Pacific Union College in Angwin and see who graduated from that school where Cecilia Shepard was attending, along with Brian Hartnell, Hartnell. But there's one person in particular that really stands out, very disturbing to me. And that person is a woman, Lori K. Sutton. She graduated in 1981 from Pacific Union College. She's a former United States Army Brigadier General. She's a founding director of Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and Traumatic Brain Injury. She's a former special assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. If you drill into her deeper, you're going to be just enormously disturbed by her, okay? Because she went to Loma Linda to get her medical degree in she's a psychiatrist, okay? And if we've learned one thing studying my videos, that MK Ultra and Manchurian Candidates are all visiting psychologist and psychiatrist. What do you think Louis Jolyon West was? He was a psychiatrist. And this woman has the same credentials as Louis Jolyon West. Louis Jolyon West is associated with Jim Jones in Jonestown. He debriefed all the survivors, what few survivors there were from Jonestown. Louis Jolyon West was involved with that. He was in Haight-Ashbury when we had the psychological warfare going on to the anti-war movement, working with Colonel Paul Tate, Sharon Tate's father, to, identify all of the anti-war protesters. This is all going on, and psychologists are involved. Timothy Leary is a psychologist. Richard Albert is a psychologist. They're associated with Harvard, University of California, Berkeley, and Stanford University, which has taken enormous amounts of money from the United States Navy for prisoner dilemma game. What do you think the possibility is that Lori Sutton is trained in prisoner dilemma game? I'd say it's 100% guaranteed. I mean, I'm trained in it, and I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm trained in prisoner dilemma game. I know a lot about the tactics involved in psychological health and how to disturb people, disturbing tracks. United States Army Command and General Staff College. That is where Lori went to school. She is a graduate of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. That's a warfare college. She also has a master's degree in National Security Strategic Studies at the National War College in Washington, D.C. Okay, well, I got a national security warning. I believe that people who study warfare are a threat to public safety. That's what I think. I think that it's the reverse. I think the enemies of the people study prisoner dilemma game and warfare. Like at the Warfare Linguistics Language Center in Monterey, like the postgraduate school in Monterey for United States Navy. Like Stanford University has Stanford Research Institute, prisoner dilemma games, National War College. What are you people doing? And if you're wearing a face diaper, that ices it for me. If you're a face diaper wearer and you have a master's degree from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff, or you have a master's degree in MS from the National War College, then I would say that you should be on a list with the Committee for Public Safety. That's what I say. All right, so then the last Zodiac killing comes after the Cecilia Shepard, who was stabbed 12 times, what looks a lot like the M7 bayonet. Brian Hartwell was only stabbed 6 times, so it's pretty clear to me that the target was Cecilia. If Brian Hartwell were the target, he'd be dead. And he wasn't killed. He was wounded, but he was neutralized, but he wasn't killed. Cecilia Shepard was hogtied with a clothesline, and she was stabbed 5 times in her chest and 7 times in her back. Now, it's kind of debatable if it was 12 wounds or whether it was this, being torqued on her because she was struggling. So it's decided that for sure she was punctured 9 times, and then some of the wounds were elongated, probably through twisting, through her moving around. It's just extraordinary to me. Like the Jeffrey McDonald killing, he's on the Fort Bragg Army base in an ungated officer housing development, which is exactly the situation you have in the Presidio with the last Zodiac killing of Paul Stein on April 11th, 1969. And then you have the Cecilia Shepard murder, what looks like it could be with the M7 bayonet, and she's in close proximity to Travis Air Force Base. I mean, that's a 15-minute drive. 15, 20 minutes. Only because the road's real curvy. As the crow flies, if you had a helicopter, it'd be like 7 minutes. 10 minutes. Anyway, so my point is that I think that we need to explore Pacific Union College. Who goes there? What do they teach? The Seventh-day Adventists. There's an academy that gets kids ready to go for it that's over in Healdsburg. It used to be called the Healdsburg Academy. It's called the Healdsburg School, or it's called, they have another name for it as well. And the Monte Rio School, where the Zodiac killing at Lake Berryessa was is Oak Shores, Twin Oaks Peninsula, Spit. It's, I'm going to go there and videotape it for you. It's fairly remote. You have to know it's there. You have to know where you're going. It's near McKenzie Ridge. It's not on McKenzie Ridge. You go past McKenzie Ridge to Twin Oaks. You park your car. You walk to where the murder of Cecilia Shepard occurs. And then on October 11th, 1969, we have the 9mm in the head for Paul Stein, age 29. Paul Pelosi Sr. is 29 years old. Paul Pelosi Jr. is 9 months old. Nancy Pelosi is 29 years old. And in that neighborhood where they live, on October 11th, 1969, Paul Pelosi is 29, Nancy Pelosi is 29, Paul Stein is 29, Sharon Tate's father, who lives there, he's 47. This is all in the wake of John Lennon getting married to Yoko Ono on March 16th, 1969, and Paul McCartney preceding that. Paul McCartney marries Linda Epstein on March 12th, 1969. Then John Lennon gets married 4 days later to Yoko Ono, who is a daughter of a private banker who had offices in Tokyo, San Francisco, Hanoi before the World War II, and then New York City, Manhattan. That's who Yoko Ono's father is. He's an international elite banker. And that Yoko Ono went to prestigious schools, boarding schools, next to the palace in Tokyo that was never bombed by the United States forces. So she was never in danger. And that's who, she goes to London directly from New York to see Paul McCartney. And then he sends her to John Lennon, where they never are apart, never separated, except for a brief time in Hollywood where John is sent with his secretary, what was her name? I forgot. Anyway, it's like the only happiness that John Lennon ever had was when he was away from Yoko, who was his control agent, if you haven't noticed, right? So all these people are controlled. That's a standard theme. That's true if you're Paul McCartney, who's completely controlled by the Scarsdale, New York Jewish family of Leon Vale Epstein and his son John Epstein and his daughter Linda Epstein. That they've got Paul McCartney power of attorney completely under control. And Alan Klein has power of attorney over John Lennon, courtesy of Yoko Ono, who brought Alan Klein in, even though the Rolling Stones are furious with him and he stole a bunch of money from them. So they're completely neutralized. And they didn't have any control over the Let It Be album, right? No control at all. And you know what? I don't think Paul McCartney and John Lennon had any control over any of their EMI, RCA Victor, CBS, Columbia Records production is controlled by the suits upstairs. They control the content. They control the themes. If they have to hire some professional to help you write the lyrics, they'll do that. They had no problem doing that. They created the Monkees. They can create the Beatles. They can help the Beatles along. So I'm telling you that the Zodiac killings are going on concurrently. With The My Lai massacre, the Albert Decker murder that Thomas Noguchi rules a suicide, the Robert Kennedy assassination, the Apollo moon launch, the Apollo, which happens on the same day that Art Linklatter's son-in-law is killed. Did you know that? John Zweier, age 33, shot in the back of the head with a .38 caliber pistol, killed next to a swimming pool in West Hollywood on the day that the Apollo 11 launches. Then we have Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger killed. Then we have Paul Pelosi, right there in Presidio Heights, happy to take over in case Ines Mejia doesn't know how to do her private banking anymore. Maybe she's a little upset that they murdered her daughter, so Paul Pelosi can take over. That seems very reasonable. That's right when he shows up. And you got then Diane Linklater, age 20, baking cookies on a Saturday morning, tossed off of her 6th-floor apartment onto the concrete sidewalks on North Horn Avenue. Right across the street was 1121 North Horn, where her neighbor Connie Monty lives. Connie Monty attends her funeral on Wednesday, 4 days later, and then she ends up murder-suicided in her bed 4 days after Diane Linklater does. Ed Durston is right there, age 27. He's baking cookies with Diane Linklater, but they say it was a suicide from LSD. There's no proof. There's no evidence that that's so. There's a lot of proof, a lot of evidence that looks like it's a murder. Anyway, the Zodiac killing is going on before, during, and after all the murders I just told you about. And then the final event, of course, is to rock out the 60s, was the Altamont Speedway free concert that Bill Graham, Wolf Grudjanka, was involved with planning, because many of the bands that he represented or presented as an impresario appeared there. Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Grateful Dead, Rolling Stones, Phil Kaufman, who's the cellmate of Charlie Manson. He's the road manager for the Rolling Stones. And the Flying Burrito Brothers, they're also in attendance for the Altamont concert on December 6, 1969. And then who's on the stage when there's another murder? Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, who's, don't forget, the founder of their band was recently murder-suicided. Louis Paul Jones, killed in a swimming pool, in June 1969, right? Right around the time that Judy Garland is murder-suicided in June 1969. That the leader of the Rolling Stones is murdered when Judy Garland is murdered in England. I mean, in the case of Judy Garland, she's killed in central London, near where Roberta Calfi was murdered later, which is the center of banking. Whereas Brian Epstein and Paul Jones of the Rolling Stones, they were murdered in Sussex, which is 62 miles south of London in South England. So they weren't killed in the banking center. They were killed in the suburbs. But they were still killed, right? And Judy Garland was killed in 1969. Paul Jones, the leader of Rolling Stones, was killed in 1969. Okay? And Paul McCartney gets owned by the Epsteins in 1969. John Lennon gets owned by Yoko Ono and her bank cartel in 1969. Sharon Tate is murdered in 1969. Abigail Folger, the future banker for clandestine services, she's murdered in 1969. Paul Avery is a writer for the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. Robert Graysmith is a cartoonist in 1969, goes on to write books about the CIA Unabomber, but he doesn't connect the CIA with Ted Kaczynski. And he writes books about the Bob Crane murder, autofocus. And he's an expert on the Zodiac killing. And he doesn't know that Paul and Nancy Pelosi live in the same neighborhood that Paul Stein was killed in, or that Sharon Tate's father lives there too. That Robert Greystone's done all this great research and he doesn't know that. That's concealment. There's no way you couldn't know that. Okay? I was a paper boy and I knew that. So, how could you not know? These are material facts. These are material facts. And 1970 is when we have the whole, Jim Jones, People's Temple, Jim Jones, Jonestown, George Moscone assassination, which makes way for Diane Feinstein to be famous as the first female, mayor of San Francisco. The murder of Harvey Milk, who's a Lithuanian Jewish person from New York, who gets a less than honorable discharge from the United States Navy in San Diego. And there he is. He's only been in San Francisco 4 years, and they canonize him as some kind of a leader of the gay movement, when there's people who have been in the gay movement for 50, 60, 70 years. Why are you crediting the New York guy? But that's what they do. They conceal the truth. And don't get me started on the Dr. Victor Ota murders, which they made into a Manson-esque killer and blamed John Linley Frazier, age 24, living in a creek bed, that he murdered 5 adults and a kitty cat using a 38 caliber pistol and a 22 caliber pistol, which were never found. And there were no cartridges found at the crime scene, unlike the first 2 Zodiac killings, where there's cartridges galore. So my point is that if you study these things and you put them all together and you see how close in timing they are, you realize they're all staged events. In other words, they're all sponsored, they're all managed, supervised, and then they use a variety of different killers to do the crime, who are backed up with logistics. Because you'll notice that really only the scapegoats get arrested. And the idea of making Charlie Manson a scapegoat for the Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Lena LaBianca crimes is really preposterous, because there are literally dozens of more qualified scapegoats that you could have picked, including Phil Kaufman, including Danny DiCarlo, Joe Dorgan, Greg Jacobson, Harold True's buddies. They're more qualified. Few of them had alibis, if any of them did. And they were working for clandestine services in more active roles than was Charlie Manson, who had no bank account, he had no job, he had no car, he had no California driver's license, and he's sitting in a prison cell in a CIA Navy weapons facility in Independence, Inyo County, China Lake, for graffiti. He's sitting in a holding pattern for graffiti. And then they drop those charges and charge him with 7 counts of first-degree murder. It's absurd on every level. There is no evidence to link any person. And there's no Manson family. That's another mendacity. There is no Manson family. Susan Atkins and Mary Bruner and Patricia Krenkel were not member of the Manson family, because there was no such thing. That's created for the newspapers and television and fake book authors. All right, thanks for listening. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.